Imagine cracking open a can of soup and realizing it packs more sodium than a bag of chips. Or worse, an undeclared allergen that could send someone straight to the ER. Sounds extreme? The FDA has logged dozens of recalls tied to processed foods in just the past year, and canned soups are right there on that list. For families on tight budgets, for seniors, for kids after school, these cans are supposed to be safe. But when seals split, cans swell, and labels stay vague, that sense of safety disappears. That's why today we're uncovering 5 canned soup brands you should avoid at all costs. And don't worry, it's not all bad news. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll know exactly which names deserve a place in your pantry and which ones don't. Campbell's. What if the soup you grew up trusting, the one you still see stacked high in grocery aisles, suddenly carried a warning label from the government? That was the reality in April 2025, when the Food Safety and Inspection Service flagged a batch of Campbell's cilantro for containing unexpected wood fragments. Wood in soup. It sounded absurd, but the incident reminded people that even the most iconic brands are not immune to mistakes that can reach your dinner table. For a company that built its reputation on trust and nostalgia, that kind of headline was more than just embarrassing. It was a crack in the armor. And here is the twist. For many Americans, Campbell's is not just a soup brand, it is a piece of childhood. The tomato soup paired with a gooey grilled cheese sandwich on a rainy day. The cream of mushroom that shows up in Thanksgiving casseroles year after year, carrying the taste of family traditions. Ads once sang, "Mum Mum Good," and kids hummed along without a care. That warm red label was more than packaging. It was comfort, safety, a shortcut to home cooking when life was too busy to cook from scratch. For millions, those cans symbolized the flavor of simpler times. But fast forward to today and reality paints a very different picture. The chunky line, one of Campbell's biggest sellers, clocks in at nearly 790 milligrams of sodium per serving. With 2 servings in one can, you are looking at almost 1,600 milligrams in a single sitting. That is more than half the FDA's daily recommended sodium limit, gone in one meal. For people living with high blood pressure, heart disease, or simply trying to eat smarter, that number is not just concerning, it is dangerous. Doctors often tell patients to cut back on salty processed foods, and Campbell's lands right in the middle of that warning. What once felt like comfort food is now flagged as a health risk. The letdown does not stop there. Campbell's did take a step forward in 2016 when it removed BPA from its packaging, a chemical tied to potential health concerns. But many consumers still complain about the metallic aftertaste that lingers in the soups. That tinny flavor, especially noticeable in tomato varieties, makes people wonder if they are tasting food or the can itself. Even with improvements, the trust gap has not closed. Every spoonful that carries that metallic edge becomes a reminder that progress and safety are not always the same thing. And that is what makes Campbell's story so emotional. It is the whiplash between past and present. A brand that once defined rainy day comfort now appears on government recall alerts. A soup that once made families feel cared for is now linked to red flags for blood pressure. Consumers are left caught between loyalty and caution, between memories of warmth and headlines of risk. It is a betrayal that does not shout, but whispers through every label, every spoonful, every doctor's warning. So where does that leave us? Campbell's still fills shelves, still sells by the millions, still taps into nostalgia every holiday season. But the glow is fading. For health-conscious shoppers, for parents worried about what their kids eat, for older adults trying to manage their diets, Campbell's is no longer the easy answer it used to be. It is a choice that requires second-guessing, label reading, and maybe even walking past the aisle altogether. From comfort food to red flag, Campbell's is proof that trust once lost can never be canned again. Great value. Imagine opening a can of soup that looks perfectly fine on the outside, only to find out later it was part of a nationwide recall. That is exactly what happened when Walmart's Great Value soups showed up on government recall lists for cracked seals and swollen cans. These are not cosmetic flaws. A broken seal lets in bacteria, turning what should be a quick meal into a potential breeding ground for illness. Families who thought they were saving money ended up facing the possibility of spoiled food, and the shock cut deep. Nobody expects the budget option to be perfect, but nobody expects it to be unsafe either. And yet, the reason Great Value has such a hold on American households is easy to understand. For families stretching every dollar, for seniors living on fixed incomes, for parents trying to fill up a cart with SNAP benefits, that white and blue label often feels like a lifeline. It shows up at food banks, at community centers, in emergency food boxes. When money is tight, a can of Great Value soup can look like salvation. It carries the image of relief, of a cheap fix, when the cupboard is nearly empty. That is why so many people feel grateful for it, even defend it. In those moments, affordability feels like safety. But dig deeper and reality tells another story. Unlike name brands that must publicly disclose their manufacturing plants, Great Value is produced by a web of third-party co-packers, many of them unnamed. That means the chicken noodle you buy today might come from one factory, while tomorrow's batch comes from another facility entirely. Different suppliers, different standards, different risks. There is no transparency about where ingredients are sourced or how they are handled, leaving the consumer effectively blind. In an era when people want more clarity about their food, Great Value offers the opposite. You do not know if the vegetables were processed safely, if the meats were inspected thoroughly, or if the facility was running at full compliance. The can on the shelf hides more than it reveals. To be fair, Walmart does have recall systems in place. When a product is flagged, the company pulls it and issues statements. But the bigger issue lies in how private label policies are structured. Walmart is not required to disclose which contractor made which batch. That lack of accountability creates a fog where problems slip through unnoticed until they are big enough to reach federal attention. For consumers, this means every purchase becomes a gamble. You might get a safe, decent can one week and a defective one the next, with no way to tell the difference until it is too late. And that is the emotional core of the story. People turn to Great Value because they believe it will stretch their budget without hurting them. They believe price equals peace of mind. But what they are really buying is risk wrapped in a discount label. Every time you put a Great Value soup in your cart, you are not just paying a low price. You are betting on an invisible system you cannot see. And when safety, trust, and nutrition are at stake, that is a gamble no family should have to make. What looked like affordable comfort ends up feeling like costly doubt. You thought you were buying safety at a bargain, but in reality, you were wagering your trust. Chef Boyardee. Picture this, a brand that generations of Americans grew up with suddenly showing up in federal recall lists. Back in 2019, Chef Boyardee products were pulled from shelves because of mislabeling tied to undeclared allergens. For families with kids who rely on these quick meals, the idea that a can could contain something undisclosed and potentially dangerous was a jolt. It is one thing to worry about too much salt or mushy pasta. It is another to imagine a child with a peanut or milk allergy reacting because the label was wrong. That single event shook the trust people had in the smiling chef on the label. And yet for many, the brand is still soaked in nostalgia. Who doesn't remember a warm bowl of ravioli after school, the taste of canned spaghetti on a rushed weeknight, or those tiny meat-filled pastas that felt like a treat during childhood sleepovers? For millions of parents, Chef Boyardee was a lifesaver, quick, cheap, and easy. Pop a can open, heat it up, and dinner was done. For kids, it was fun food. For adults, it was the shortcut that bought them time. Those memories carry warmth and familiarity, which is why so many people still toss a can into their grocery cart without a second thought. But nostalgia does not erase reality. When you flip the can around and actually read the nutrition label, the story looks very different. Protein levels are shockingly low compared to what you'd expect from something marketed as beef ravioli or meat sauce. What fills the gap? Starches, fillers, and sodium. lots of sodium. A single serving can easily push hundreds of milligrams, and for people already dealing with high blood pressure, that is a risk that adds up fast. Reports and audits of Conagra facilities, the company behind Chef Boyardee, have also revealed problems with hygiene, cross-contamination risks, and lapses in temperature control. These are not ancient history, they are issues flagged in public audits and cited as recent as the last decade. And while each violation might be resolved on paper, they leave behind an uneasy question. If problems keep reappearing, how much can we trust the system behind the can? Still, it would be unfair to say the brand survives only because of ignorance. The real reason Chef Boyardee remains so deeply rooted in American pantries is accessibility. It is cheap, it is everywhere, and it shows up in places where choices are limited. Food banks hand it out, schools have relied on it, and emergency food boxes almost always include it. For struggling households, for parents juggling multiple jobs, for seniors who need something quick and filling, these cans are a safety net. But here's the catch. What they provide is not lasting nourishment. It is what nutritionists call illusory fullness. You feel full, but your body has not received the balanced nutrients it needs. Over time, that gap adds to health risks rather than reduces them. And that is where the emotional twist lands. On the outside, you still see the friendly chef smiling wide, promising comfort. But inside the can, what you really get is a hollow promise, a meal that fills the stomach but not the body. It is food designed to stretch time and budgets, but not to support long-term health. And for a brand that built its reputation on trust and family comfort, that gap between image and reality cuts deeper than any label ever could. You thought you were opening a can of childhood comfort, but what you got instead was a reminder that sometimes the most familiar faces hide the biggest voids. Progresso. For years, Progresso has been marketed as the grown-up alternative to basic canned soup, with its home-style branding and images of hearty vegetables spilling out of the spoon. But even premium labels are not immune to controversy. In 2020, the USDA announced a recall of Progresso Organic Chicken Noodle Soup because it contained undeclared allergens. For parents shopping in the organic aisle, the very section meant to feel safer. The news landed like a betrayal. Buying organic is supposed to mean one less thing to worry about, yet here was a reminder that labels do not always protect consumers the way we think they do. Still, the reputation of Progresso has been tied to its place in family kitchens. Many people grew up seeing Progresso cans as the fancier choice, the brand you served when you wanted to feel a step above the usual. Compared to cheaper canned soups, the marketing leaned heavily into fresh vegetables, bold flavors, and a gourmet touch. For a while, it worked. People associated the label with something closer to homemade, something that suggested real care went into the recipe. That perception is powerful. It is the reason Progresso is still seen in pantries where families want to believe they are giving their kids something better. But nostalgia and branding cannot hide the fine print. Flip the can over, and the ingredient list tells a different story. The phrase natural flavors appears again and again, a catch-all term that food scientists and consumer watchdogs alike have flagged for years. Behind those two words could be a whole range of additives, extracts, or processing agents that the average shopper has no way of decoding. And then there is the sourcing. Unlike smaller farm-to-table operations, Progresso's supply chain stretches globally. Some of the vegetables are imported, which raises questions about pesticide standards. What passes inspection abroad might not match the tighter guidelines in the United States, leaving a gray area where risk creeps in quietly. To be fair, General Mills has made efforts to address consumer demand for healthier options. The company launched a light sodium line that cuts the sodium to around 480 milligrams per serving, a meaningful drop compared to the 700 or more you see in typical canned soup. That is progress on paper, but the reality is that most of Progresso's lineup still lands squarely in the high sodium zone, especially if you eat the whole can, which most people do. For someone with hypertension or a family history of heart problems, that is not a small risk. It is a daily decision that can snowball into long-term health consequences. And this is where the emotional tension hits hardest. The label might say premium. The packaging might hint at farmhouse kitchens and gourmet recipes, but the contents do not always live up to the promise. Instead, what you often get is an industrial formula dressed up in a pretty coat. That contrast, the warm home-style image on the outside and the processed reality on the inside, creates a sense of unease. It forces shoppers to question whether the extra dollars they spend are really buying safety and quality or just a marketing illusion. In the end, Progresso becomes less of a symbol of comfort and more of a reminder that sometimes the nicest-looking packaging hides the cheapest tricks. Annie's. At first glance, Annie's looks like the kind of brand parents dream about. The little bunny logo, the soft pastel packaging, the word organic printed boldly across the label. It all whispers safety, trust, and care. For years, that bunny has hopped into shopping carts as a symbol of healthier childhoods, a way for parents to feel they were making the right choice in a world of confusing food labels. But under that cute exterior, there are warning signs that should not be ignored. The shock for many families comes when they realize that even Annie's, the brand marketed almost like a safe haven, is not free from criticism. Some of its canned and packaged products have sodium levels high enough to raise eyebrows among dietitians. For kids especially, where daily sodium intake should stay lower, that can add up quickly. And then there's the issue of production facilities. Because Annie's shares plants with other General Mills brands, there's the possibility of cross-contamination with allergens. For parents of children with sensitivities, that is more than a technical detail. It's a real source of anxiety every time a meal is served. Still, it is impossible to ignore the emotional connection many parents have with Annie's. Buying those bunny-shaped crackers or an organic soup for school lunch felt like an act of love, a small victory against the tide of processed food. The brand built its reputation on trust. When you chose Annie's, you felt like you were choosing the safer aisle. The aisle where childhood health mattered more than corporate profit. That memory of good intentions is hard to let go of, and it is why disappointment cuts deeper when cracks in the image begin to show. Look closer, and reality complicates the story. Just because something carries the organic seal does not mean it is free of loopholes. The ingredient natural flavors appears in Annie's too, and the FDA allows hundreds of compounds to fall under that single phrase. For consumers, it means you do not actually know what is behind the curtain. It is the kind of vague label that makes nutritionists uneasy and leaves parents wondering whether the organic glow is really protecting their families or just distracting them from what they are not being told. To be fair, some of Annie's SKUs do offer better nutrition profiles than the average canned soup. Certain options keep sodium lower, others highlight simpler ingredients, and those do have their place. But the lesson here is not that every Annie's product is dangerous. The lesson is that consumers cannot let the halo effect of organic do the thinking for them. Every can, every label, every set of ingredients deserves a second look. Trust has to be earned, not just packaged with a bunny and a buzzword. And this is where the emotional truth lands. The bunny logo might be cute, but it cannot cover the fact that organic is not always transparent. The trust parents place in that symbol is real, and the disappointment that comes when they feel misled is even more real. Annie sits at the crossroads of good intentions and uncomfortable realities, reminding us that even the friendliest brands can carry risks that families need to take seriously. The question is not whether you want the bunny in your pantry, it is whether you are willing to look past it to see what is really inside. Amy's. Every list of avoid at all costs needs a ray of light, and for many cautious shoppers, Amy's has become that rare glimmer of trust in the canned soup aisle. Unlike so many brands hiding behind vague ingredient lists, Amy's has built its reputation on transparency. The labels tend to read more like a recipe card than a chemistry experiment. Tomato basil, lentil vegetable, minestrone, ingredients you can recognize, pronounce, and imagine in your own kitchen. That is the first sign of safety. when a brand respects the consumer enough to show exactly what is inside. What stands out even more is that Amy's consistently avoids shortcuts that others lean on. Independent nutrition audits and consumer advocacy reviews have noted that sodium levels, while not perfect, are generally lower compared to giants like Campbell's Chunky or Progresso. For people managing blood pressure or heart conditions, that difference matters. And beyond the numbers, there is the absence of controversial additives. No MSG, no artificial flavors, no BPA in the cans. In a market where cost-cutting often means cutting corners, those decisions are signals of a company taking the harder road. Of course, Amy's is not flawless. Some customers complain about taste. Too bland, not enough salt, or simply different compared to the nostalgic kick of mainstream brands. Others point out that organic does not always mean affordable. A single can of Amy's soup can cost double or even triple a great value alternative. For families living on SNAP budgets or those stocking a prepper pantry, that price gap is no small hurdle. But when the conversation shifts to long-term health, many are willing to see it as an investment rather than an expense. That tension between cost and quality is exactly where Amy's draws its power. It has become the brand people recommend when a friend asks, "What is actually safe to buy?" You see it in online forums, in dietitian blogs, and in comment sections filled with frustration over sodium bombs disguised as comfort food. Amy's is the name that pops up again and again as a safer fallback, not because it is perfect, but because it clears the most important bar: trust. And in today's food landscape, trust is priceless. The FDA has had to issue recall after recall across the industry, from foreign objects in cilantro to undeclared allergens in premium soups. Consumers are exhausted by the roulette of wondering what is safe to put on the table. Amy's may not be a miracle cure for all those anxieties, but it represents a rare thing, a brand where transparency, consistency, and consumer respect still come first. In the end, Amy's stands as proof that canned soup does not have to mean compromise. The flavors may not always wow you, and the price may sting at checkout, but the peace of mind it delivers is worth weighing. When so many cans on the shelf feel like a gamble, Amy's is one of the few you can reach for without second-guessing every spoonful. Pacific Foods. When you first hear that Pacific Foods is now owned by Campbell's, the same giant we just called out, it feels like a red flag waiting to wave. After all, when a small, respected brand gets swallowed by a corporate empire, history shows standards often slip. But here's where Pacific stands out. Despite the acquisition, many of its core practices have stayed intact, and that makes it one of the safer bets in the soup aisle today. Start with the packaging. While most canned soup still comes in metal lined with resins, Pacific has leaned heavily on paper cartons. It may look less traditional, but food safety experts note that cartons lower the risk of chemical leaching and reduce waste. That alone sets them apart in a market struggling with consumer distrust over metallic aftertastes and BPA scares. Then there is the ingredient sourcing. Pacific has long promoted its relationships with trusted growers, often regional and domestic. Their organic line is USDA certified, and advocacy groups tracking pesticide residues consistently rank Pacific lower risk than big box competitors. In 2020, when Progresso faced a recall over undeclared allergens in chicken soup, Pacific managed to sidestep similar headlines. Their supply chain may not be flawless, but the brand has shown a pattern of tighter control than most. Nutritionally, Pacific soups are not miracle foods, but they tend to land in the middle ground. Lower sodium than Campbell's Chunky, cleaner labels than Great Value, and a shorter ingredient list compared to Chef Boyardee. For consumers managing high blood pressure or sensitive to additives, that balance can make the difference between comfort and concern. Dietitians often cite Pacific's lentil, butternut squash, and tomato basil varieties as better options for patients seeking both flavor and nutrition without the usual overload of salt or starch. Still, there are caveats. Prices are higher than mainstream cans, and some shoppers complain about inconsistent texture, especially in pureed varieties. Others point out that being under Campbell's ownership means the risk of cost-cutting could always loom. But so far, Pacific has managed to resist the worst-case scenarios many feared. And that resilience matters. In a food system where recalls have become routine, wood chips and cilantro, undeclared allergens in chicken broth, cans swelling from poor seals, Pacific has built a quieter record of stability. The brand does not flood the market with dozens of confusing SKUs. Instead, it keeps its range limited enough to monitor quality, a strategy that consumers who feel burned by big brands have come to appreciate. At the end of the day, Pacific Foods represents a cautious optimism. It is proof that even inside a corporate umbrella, a brand can still fight to hold on to its original standards. For consumers, that means one thing. When the shelf is full of choices that feel like gambles, Pacific is one of the few where the odds are in your favor. So here we are, 5 brands that turned comfort into concern, and 2 that still show us food can be honest when companies choose to care. At the end of the day, a can of soup should never feel like a gamble. It should be warmth on a cold night, not a question mark in your pantry. The truth is, the system won't change overnight and labels won't suddenly become crystal clear. But what we can do together is look closer, ask harder questions, and vote with our dollars. Every purchase is more than just dinner. It's a message about the kind of food future we're willing to accept. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Safety and trust shouldn't be luxuries. If this breakdown made you think twice, share it with someone who still has those cans stacked high at home. And if you want more deep dives like this, you know what to do. Stick around, because we're just getting started.